What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Optimizer's Anvil, part of the Arcanist Forge Network. My name's Ark, the tabletop Arcanist, and in this series I bring you through an in-depth guide to a specific, powerful, or interesting D&D build. This particular video is going to be discussing the Astral Kaiju build, or as I call it in my own head, the Kitty Kaiju. This build focuses on dealing damage via grappling and the spike growth spell, but it also focuses on increasing your own size to huge, so that you can wrestle almost any creature in the game. And I call it the Kitty Kaiju because you are going to be taking the Tabaxi race, so eventually you're going to be a 20-foot tall kitty cat. So if you like cats and you like kaiju battles, you're going to love this build. But before we get into that, I did mention that this build uses the spike growth spell, which is kind of controversial for several reasons. The gist of the spell is that it deals 2d4 damage for every 5 feet a creature moves across it. Seems pretty simple and uncontroversial. However, there are many people who argue that only voluntary movement triggers spike growth. Their argument is that moving is different than being moved. However, there are many spells in D&D that specifically only affect voluntary movement, and they are called out in their spell description, such as Booming Blade. Spike Growth does not have that caveat in its spell description, which leads me to believe that involuntary movement is totally fine. I believe this is also the most common interpretation of the spell, as I see most forums going with this as far as for builds and stuff like that. Jeremy Crawford, one of the lead designers of D&D, seems to support this as well in some of his tweets, but he was talking about a different spell that involves involuntary movement, so it leaves a little bit of wiggle room for argument. So just before you decide to make this build, or any spike growth build really, it's definitely something you want to talk to your DM about and make sure that you're both on the same page as far as rules interpretations go. The second reason that this spell is a bit controversial is that it is insanely powerful. Builds that even mention it in passing are usually firmly lodged in the S tier of builds, and this build is no exception to that. However, mercifully, the math of spike growth is actually really easy to tweak, so if you need to push down some of its numbers to accommodate a lower powered group, you can totally do that and still have this really fun build be playable. Okay, with all that said, let's get into the Astral, or Kitty, Kaiju. As I mentioned before, we're going to be taking the Tabaxi race. Tabaxi have a special trait called Feline Swiftness that allows them to double their movement speed on their turn. This requires no action, and for a spec that is focused on dealing damage by dragging somebody through spike growth, doubling your movement speed is astronomically fantastic. Now, this comes with a drawback that the ability doesn't recharge until you move 0 feet on one of your turns. Essentially what this means for us is that we're going to be able to deal 2 turns worth of spike growth damage in 1 turn, and then use that turn where we're not moving to do other things like heal ourselves or just punch somebody for extra damage. It's kind of like cheating the action economy with this build. You just get an extra set of actions to use, which makes this, I think, a little bit more useful than, say, the Centaur or the Shifter, who just has higher move speed than you baseline. As far as stats go, we're going to want to maximize strength and constitution. But we also need 13 int, 13 dex, and 13 wisdom. This is because we're going to be taking dips in rogue, druid, and a significant number of levels in artificer. This does spread our stats pretty thin, but don't worry, we'll be able to make up for it with some artificer features later on. Okay, getting into the meat and potatoes of the build, at level 1, we are a fighter 1. Concentration is very important for this build, and we're going to be taking fighter levels anyway, so we may as well start off with a class that gives us constitution saving throws. We're also going to want to be wearing heavy armor because we're going to be up in our opponent's faces like 100% of the time. As far as skills go, we do get access to athletics, which is obviously going to boost our ability to grapple enemies. And we also get a fighting style, which we're going to pick unarmed. While we don't actually care too much about boosting our unarmed damage, this does give us an extra 1d4 damage a turn that is unavoidable to any creature that we are grappling. This extra d4 damage doesn't cost any action, so it's really just an ambient drain on any enemy we're fighting. We also get second wind, which is pretty nice for us because, like I said, we're going to be taking a lot of lumps as this build. So our MO for now is to find an enemy, grapple them, and then just squeeze the life out of them with your grappling ability and just punch them to death. Your damage output isn't amazing at this level, but it's pretty good, and you do take an enemy out of the fight so that it can't attack your more squishy backline. At level 2, we immediately dip out of Fighter and jump into Druid so that we can sprint towards level 3, getting Spike Growth. At Druid level 1, we get access to a couple notable spells, Healing Word, Cure Wounds, and most importantly, Long Strider. Long Strider just gives us 10 extra feet to our movement speed, but like I said, our damage is going to come from how fast we can move. And movement speed boosts aren't super common in D&D, so you gotta hoard them where you can get them. At level 3, we go Druid 2. I heavily recommend Circle of the Stars. Star Map is not useful for us at all. It gives you like a special focus and the ability to cast Guiding Bolt, but we suck at doing that, so we're probably never gonna do it. The other ability we get, however, is incredible. It allows us to use our Wild Shape charges to enter a starry form. When you enter this starry form, you choose a constellation and gain benefits based on that constellation. The two we're most interested in are the Chalice and the Dragon. The Chalice will greatly enhance our healing ability, allowing us to add an extra 1d8 plus wisdom to our healing spells. Also, this is not the only buff to healing we'll get with this build. Artificer is also going to afford us some, so eventually we're going to actually be a pretty good healer. The Dragon constellation, on the other hand, allows you to treat any roll of less than a 10 as a 10 on concentration checks. This is amazing for low levels because most monsters aren't going to be doing more than 10 damage when they hit you. This means that you'll basically never lose concentration on your important spells like Spike Growth. Finally, at level 4, we are a Druid 3 and we get Spike Growth. Our MO in combat becomes this. On turn 1, our bonus action is going to allow us to assume the starry form of our choice. Then we'll use our movement to get to an enemy and our action to grapple them. Turn 2, we cast Spike Growth and place it so our enemy is within it, but we are just without it. You can then use your movement to get a little bit of extra damage right away. Our combo really begins on this third turn. We are going to activate Feline Swiftness. Because of Long Strider, our movement is already 40 feet and it now doubles to 80. We then use our movement to go 80 feet and our action to dash for another 80 feet, making us move 160 feet in a single round. Now, unless you're grappling an opponent that is 2 size categories lower than you, you do have your movement speed when you're dragging a grappled opponent, meaning that total will only move 80 feet, which is still a ton. And remember, you don't have to drag people through unique parts of Spike Growth. You can literally just move back and forth a million times and just kind of rub their faces in the spikes. The neat thing about Spike Growth damage math is that it's actually really easy to do because average Spike Growth damage equates to dealing 1 damage per foot of movement you move. So at level 4, we just did 80 damage. 80 damage is a game-warping amount of damage to deal at this level. Oh, not to mention the extra d4 damage you did from your fighting style, so it's actually 82.5. However, this giant chunk of damage does come with a pretty big caveat. This math I did is strictly rules as written. I myself tend to be a pretty strictly rules as written DM, however, even I kind of balk at this combo. And that's because Spike Growth is difficult terrain. There are no rules written in D&D to cover how dragging somebody across difficult terrain will affect their movement speed. As far as the rules are concerned, if you're not standing in the difficult terrain, you're not affected by it. And there's really no rules as written argument against that fact. At least not one that I've ever found, and I'm a huge nerd about this kind of stuff. However, this seems like more of a bug than a feature. Logically, it would obviously be a lot harder to drag somebody through difficult terrain than it would be to drag them through clear terrain. But it's such a tiny little specific edge case that I don't really think the designers thought it was worthwhile to address. So, long rant made short, I'd say that a lot of DMs, like probably more than 75%, are going to rule against you for this specific usage of the combo. If they do, your movement speed will be quartered, because it'll be halved for dragging somebody, and then halved again for difficult terrain. Moving forward with the build, because I think this is going to be such a common interpretation of the rules, I'm going to just give you 2 damage totals. One for if your DM is going off of rules as written, and one going off of what I assume is rules as intended. So this leaves you with either 40 damage or 80 damage depending on your DM. But this is just one round. You still have your round where you can't move at all. In that round, you're still just going to punch an opponent and then squeeze them with your grapple. So over the course of these 2 rounds, we do 42.5 to 82.5 damage with our feline swiftness round, and roughly 9 damage in our standstill round. So if you average this out, you either do 26 or 46 damage. Sorry that got so mathy, but with all of that out of the way, our calculations are going to be easy moving forward. At level 5, we dip out of Druid and jump into our Rogue levels. At level 1, we get a massive boost to our utility in the form of being able to pick Expertise and Athletics. This means that our bonus to grappling an opponent just went from 5 all the way to 9. But that boost pales in comparison to what we'll get at level 6, Rogue 2. We now get Cunning Action, meaning that we can dash with a bonus action. So our hitherto unused bonus action in our feline swiftness rounds just got translated to another 80 feet of movement speed. Our swiftness round speed is now 240 total, halved to 120 or quartered to 60. Averaging in our off-round damage, we're now putting out 36 to 66 DPR. We now have most of the core abilities for this build. How you build out from here is going to depend on what you want to prioritize. If your DM is quartering your movement, you may want to jump into Druid 4 here to get the mobile feat, which will allow you to ignore difficult terrain for the most part. However, even if we are being quartered, we are going to start fighting probably larger monsters at this point in the campaign. And it's going to become more difficult to grapple those monsters, so I think I'm going to opt for going into utility at this point. So at level 7, we go Fighter 2. We all know what Fighter 2 gives us, and it's Action Surge. This is a great ability for us because we can use it in our feline swiftness rounds to get an extra dash. This will give you 1 turn of moving 360 feet. This will translate to 180 damage if we're being halved, or 90 damage if we're being quartered, which is just a Falcon Punch level of damage at this level. At level 8, we get our subclass, which is going to give us the Rune Knight. This is going to give us our first step into becoming the namesake of this build because it allows us to increase our size to large. Hitherto, this build has fallen apart anytime you were presented with a creature that was a size category larger than large. This is because you can't grapple a creature that is 2 size categories larger than you are. The Rune Knight gives us Giant Might, which, like I said, allows us to increase our size category to large, which allows us to grapple huge creatures. It also increases our punching damage a little bit, which is nice, and gives us advantage on strength checks, which is amazing because grapple checks are strength-based. So we are now large, and we're also kind of astral and glowy looking because of our astral form. Essentially, at this point, we are like a 10-foot tall lion that is made up of stars, which is like a really cool visual, and why I often refer to this build as the Astral Kaiju, even though in my heart it will always be the Kitty Kaiju. So now our build breaks down significantly less often, and if we ever find ourselves grappling a small creature, our movement won't be halved by grappling, which will obviously increase our damage output to an insane degree. We also get runes, which are fantastic, but this build is already really complicated, so I'm not going to do a huge breakdown of the runes in the interest of time. Suffice to say, Cloud is the best and the others are situationally useful. Going into level 9, we enter our largest chunk of levels, which are going to be in Artificer. Artificer affords us a lot of awesome stuff, but most importantly, it's eventually going to give us a spell storing item, which will allow us to cast Spike Growth with our familiar, leaving our concentration free to do other insane things. At Artificer 1, however, we already get a tidy little damage boost in the form of Booming Blade and Green Flame Blade. I recommend taking both, honestly, as they're both really good. Booming Blade is going to punish a monster that breaks your grapple, and Green Flame Blade is going to be a little bit of an extra boost to DPR if you're in a multi-target situation. Now, in our off rounds, instead of just punching somebody, we can use one of these 2 cantrips. This also means that we'll have to have a weapon in our hand, and I recommend just taking any 1d8 strength weapon. Just remember that in combat, if you do have to cast a spell or heal yourself, you might have to fiddle around with your object interactions, stowing and taking out your focus and stuff like that. At level 10, we get infusions, and we're going to start off with the Mind Sharpener. This fantastic little item allows us to burn our reaction to turn a failed concentration check into a pass. This will be a nice insurance measure if we don't have a bonus action to waste going into our astral form, or we simply are out of wild shape charges. Like I said, this build really relies on that concentration, so anything you get to help you bolster your concentration checks is amazing for us. And at this point, honestly, with Mind Sharpener and our astral form, our concentration is like the most safe I've ever had it be in any build. The second infusion we're going to take is going to be a big boost in utility in the form of enhanced weapon. While we don't care too much about making our weapon more powerful, artificers can use any item that they have infused as a focus. This means that you can now use your sword as a focus for things other than Booming Blade, which is really nice and will give you some utility in combat. At level 11, Artificer 3, we are going to take the Alchemist subclass. This gives us access to the Experimental Elixir trait, which, as everyone who watches my channel knows, I love. It allows us to trade first level spells for elixirs, which are concentration-less buffs. The one we care about is the Swiftness Elixir, which will boost our movement speed by another 10. And if you have spell slots to spare, you can also take Resistance, which will boost your armor by 1. If we have access to full plate, which we probably do at this point in the game, this will make our AC 19. So our movement speed is now 50 because of Longstrider and our Swiftness Potion, and we now get an extra D8 for Booming Blade. Our DPR is now based off of moving 300 feet in our Swiftness round. Average into the rest of our damage, this will give us 46 DPR to 83. And at level 12, we get another huge boost. We go Artificer 4, and we take the Mobile Feat. This will increase our movement speed by 10, and when we take the dash action, it will allow us to ignore difficult terrain for that turn. This means that spike growth will probably not affect us at all, even if our DM had been quartering us hitherto. Now, I don't want to say this is an absolute certainty, but it's how I would rule as a DM. I would say that once you get the mobile feat, you have successfully circumvented the rules as intended. But, like I said before, talk to your DMs, always over-communicate with your DMs just to make sure that you both agree on everything you're doing. So, our movement is now 60, doubled to 120 by Feline Swiftness. We then use our movement, our action, and our dash to move 360 feet. It's then halved because we're grappling down to 180. Meaning in our Feline Swiftness rounds, we're going to be dealing 182.5 damage because of our grappling fighting style. Averaging that into our damage, we are now at 98 DPR. Woo! That's a lot of damage. At level 13, we go Artificer 5. We get access to Alchemical Savant, which will allow us to add our intelligence modifier to a single roll of a damage spell or a healing spell that we produce via our Artificer tools. At level 14, we go Artificer 6. We get tool expertise, and we get an additional infusion which we'll put on our armor, giving us AC 20. At level 15, Artificer 7, we get Flash of Genius, which will allow us to use our reaction to boost somebody else's roll equal to our intelligence modifier, but our intelligence modifier is pretty low at this point. At level 16, we get another ASI, and we're going to set ourselves up for later. Like I said, we're going to want to put a spell storing ring on a familiar, and we don't have one yet, so we're going to take Ritual Caster and choose Wizard. In this way, we'll get access to the Find Familiar spell. Likely, we're going to want to choose an owl or whatever is the fastest thing you can get your hands on, so it can cast the spell and then run away. At level 17, we're an Artificer 9, and we get Restorative Reagents. This gives anyone who drinks one of our elixirs 2d6 plus our intelligence modifier in temporary HP. We also get a boost to our Booming Blade, which is not a huge boost in damage, but it is nice nonetheless. At level 18, Artificer 10, we actually get a whole bunch of cool stuff. First off, your enhanced weapon now boosts your accuracy and damage by 2. Your enhanced armor now boosts your armor by 2, putting us to AC 21. And we can make a Cloak of Protection, giving us AC 22. Our intelligence at this point sucks, which is severely limiting a lot of our intelligence-based abilities. But we can now replicate a Headband of Intellect. This will boost our intelligence to 19, which will be a big boon for our Flash of Genius and our various healing abilities. You also get the Magic Item Adept feature, which will allow you to attune 4 items, which is really nice because I'm assuming at some point in your campaign you've picked up attunement items that you haven't made yourself, particularly by level 18. I'm sure you'll have some cool stuff that you've been struggling to fit into your build. You also get the ability to craft uncommon magic items at a quarter of the time that a normal person would need and at half the cost. So you can now spend your downtime pumping out +1 versions of stuff that you and your teammates are still using the basic version of. At level 19, Artificer 11, we get a mega charge to our damage. We get a spell storing item, which we can infuse with Spike Growth. Your familiar can now swoop in, cast Spike Growth, and then get the hell out of there, giving you a very safe concentration on that spell. This frees up our own concentration for 2 fantastic combos. The first is my favorite, and it's Enlarge Reduce. This will allow us to use Giant's Growth to become large, and then enlarge ourselves again to become huge. With our Wild Shape active, we're now a 20 to 30 foot tall astral lion, and again, I just think that's the coolest. The important thing about this size increase is something I actually missed about 5th edition until doing this video. In 3.5, there was the colossal size category, which was the biggest form of creatures. 5th edition doesn't have that. The largest category is Gargantuan, which is no longer 2 size categories larger than you. This means that you can now give the people's elbow to creatures such as the Tarrasque, an ancient red dragon, or the Kraken. And you're good at it. A Tarrasque only has +10 to grapple, but you have +15 and advantage on the checks. And you can hit yourself with Flash of Genius, making you just insanely good at hitting grapple checks. You are now the wrestling champion of the cosmos, and I think that is just the coolest. Who doesn't want to end a campaign with one of your players physically wrestling Tiamat? However, this combo just keeps your damage consistent against large foes. If you're facing anything less than Gargantuan, there's a much more effective combo out there. And that is to cast Haste on yourself. This adds 2 to your AC, giving you 24 total AC, and gives you an extra action that you can use to dash. But most importantly, it doubles your speed. Because our move speed is 60, this gives us 120 speed, and then we activate Feline Swiftness, giving us 240 base speed. We're reaching superhero levels of speed at this point in the game. So in our swiftness rounds, we can now dash with our haste action, dash with our bonus action, dash with our action, and we get our move speed. And if we're feeling spicy, we can action surge and dash again. With action surge, you will move 1,200 feet in 6 seconds. Or without action surge, you'll move 960. So having that, because we are grappling, in our action surge round, we'll deal 600 damage, and in a non-action surge round, we'll deal 480. Woo! That's a lot of damage! Factoring in our cooldown round, our DPR is now 252 damage. But damage aside, I just think this is the coolest looking build in all of D&D. You are a hyperspeed kaiju fighting monster, and I just don't think you can get cooler than that. And as usual for multi-class builds, our level 20 is kind of lackluster in that we just get an ASI. We'll pump it into strength and call it a day on this insane build. I love and hate this build. I love it because it's aesthetically the coolest build I have ever made personally, but it's probably game breaking. Spike growth is really strong, but it is fortunately easy to tweak. If you're playing in an A to a B tier campaign, I always suggest not completely banning a build. This requires a little bit of effort and compromise between you and a DM. So spike growth deals 2d4 damage. This equates out to 5 damage per 5 feet you drag somebody over spike growth, because the average roll of a d4 is 2.5. So if this build starts to get out of hand, you have the ability to just pare that back a little bit. Your first step could make it just deal 1d4 plus 2. That shaves 0.5 damage off of its average damage. If that's not enough, you can step it down to 1d4 plus 1, and if you're playing in a very low-powered campaign, you can step it all the way down to 1d4. In this way, you are able to incorporate this build at any level of play for D&D. Just be sure you don't nerf a player too far down. They should still be the upper tier damage dealer in your group. They put forth the effort to make an interesting and particularly powerful build, so they should be rewarded for that. They just can't be so powerful that it invalidates everybody else. This is not an easy balance to strike, but as DMs, it's just something that we have to figure out. And if you do nerf them pretty severely, maybe buff something else. Maybe make their grapple damage do a little bit extra. Something just cool and ribbony that will make them feel a little bit better about the nerfs. Well, that's all I have to say about this awesome build. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and I would absolutely love it if you would subscribe to my channel. And if you want to support an independent creator even further, please check out my Patreon page. Thank you all for watching, and keep forging on.